My entitled husband divorced me after cheating, completely destroyed me in court, took everything I had worked for and left me with nothing but debt and humiliation. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he did it all while pretending to be the victim, manipulating everyone around us, including our children, into believing I was the unstable, unreasonable one who drove him away. Now, 3 years later, he's lost everything. His job, his reputation, his new wife, his relationship with our kids, and every single asset he stole from me. And you won't believe what this pathetic excuse of a man is begging me to do to save him from complete ruin. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special. I can't wait to share. Let me paint you the full picture of just how spectacularly this man's life has imploded. Because when I say I destroyed him completely, I mean I dismantled every single pillar of the life he built on my sacrifices. 3 years ago, I was married to a man I'll call Damian Rothwell, a name that now makes my skin crawl. We lived in what I thought was our dream home in Millbrook Heights, an upscale suburb of Riverside Springs. I had spent 12 years of my life building what I believed was a partnership, a marriage, a future. I had sacrificed my own career aspirations to support his climb up the corporate ladder at Nexus Financial Group. I had given him 2 beautiful children, our daughter Chloe, now 16, and our son Tyler, now 14. I had poured my heart, my energy, and my entire identity into being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect supporter of his dreams. What I didn't know was that while I was busy being perfect, Damian was busy being a lying, manipulative, entitled piece of garbage who thought he deserved everything and owed nothing to anyone, especially not to the woman who had given him everything. The cheating started, as I later discovered, almost 2 years before our divorce. Her name was Amber Sinclair, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator at his company, who was everything I wasn't at that point in my life. She was young, she was available, she didn't have stretch marks, or the exhaustion that comes from raising 2 teenagers while managing a household. She didn't ask him to take out the trash or remind him about parent-teacher conferences or expect him to be present for family dinners. She was the exciting escape from the responsibilities he had chosen, but apparently never wanted. But Damian wasn't just cheating on me, he was systematically planning my destruction. While I was busy trying to save our marriage, going to couples therapy alone because he was always too busy with work, he was meeting with divorce attorneys. While I was researching weekend getaways to reconnect our relationship, he was hiding assets. While I was buying him thoughtful gifts for our anniversary, he was opening secret bank accounts and transferring money out of our joint savings. When he finally served me with divorce papers, it wasn't just a divorce, it was a declaration of war. And he had been preparing for this battle for months while I didn't even know we were fighting. The man who had promised to love me through sickness and health, who had vowed to be my partner through better or worse, had apparently decided that worse included me aging past 35 and developing opinions about how our money should be spent. He wanted out, but he didn't just want his freedom. He wanted to punish me for having the audacity to expect him to honor his commitments. In court, this man painted me as an unstable, controlling, financially irresponsible woman who had contributed nothing to our marriage. His attorney, a shark named Patricia Vance, had somehow gathered evidence that I was mentally unstable, that I had been emotionally abusive, that I had been secretly spending money on frivolous purchases. They had financial records that showed mysterious large expenditures from our accounts, expenditures that I knew nothing about, but somehow had my name attached to them. They claimed I was an unfit mother who put my own needs before our children's well-being. They had witnesses, friends who I thought cared about our family, testifying that I had been erratic, jealous, and difficult to be around. They painted Damian as the long-suffering husband who had finally found the courage to leave a toxic situation for the sake of his children and his own mental health. And the most gut-wrenching part? Our kids believed him. Chloe and Tyler, who I had devoted my entire adult life to raising, looked at me like I was the villain in their story. Damien had been poisoning them against me for months, telling them that Mommy was sick, that Mommy was making Daddy unhappy, that Daddy was only trying to protect the family from Mommy's problems. When the dust settled, I had lost everything. The house went to him, the savings went to him. I got limited custody of my own children, a mountain of legal debt, and a tiny apartment in the worst part of Riverside Springs. Damien got to keep his six-figure job, his reputation, his freedom, and his new young girlfriend who moved into my house within a month of our divorce being finalized. But here's what Damien Rothwell didn't count on when he decided to destroy me. I am not the weak, broken woman he thought he was discarding. I am the woman who built his life, who managed his career behind the scenes, who knew every detail of his business dealings, who had connections he had forgotten about, and who had been underestimated for the last time. What happened next wasn't just revenge, it was justice. And by the time I was finished, Damien Rothwell learned that destroying someone's life is a game that two people can play, but only one can win. The man who thought he could throw me away like garbage is now begging me to save him from the consequences of his own actions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how a cheating, entitled, manipulative husband learned that some women don't just disappear quietly when you try to destroy them. Some of us fight back, and some of us win. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. Let me take you back 15 years to when this nightmare began, though I didn't know it was a nightmare at the time. My name is Rebecca, and I was 26 when I met Damien Rothwell at a networking event in downtown Riverside Springs. I had just finished my MBA from Westfield University and was working as a junior analyst at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm. I was ambitious, driven, and had my whole life mapped out ahead of me. Damien was 29, charming in that polished, corporate way that made him seem more sophisticated than he actually was. He worked at Nexus Financial Group as a senior account manager, driving a BMW he probably couldn't afford, and wearing suits that looked expensive but weren't quite designer quality. He had this way of talking about his future like it was inevitable, not planned, not hoped for, but guaranteed. He was going to be a vice president by 35, he was going to own a house in Millbrook Heights, he was going to have the perfect family and the perfect life. What drew me to him wasn't his ambition. I had plenty of my own. It was his confidence. Damien never seemed to doubt himself, never seemed to worry about failure or rejection. He moved through the world like someone who had never been told no and expected that trend to continue forever. At 26, coming from a middle-class family where we worked hard for everything we had, his certainty felt magnetic. Looking back now, I can see that confidence for what it really was, entitlement, but at the time it felt like strength. Damien was the kind of man who ordered wine at restaurants without looking at the price, who tipped generously when he wanted to impress someone, and who talked about investments and portfolios like he was already wealthy instead of just aspiring to be. He had this way of making you feel special when his attention was focused on you, like you were the most fascinating person in the room. He would listen intently when you spoke, ask thoughtful questions, and remember little details about your life that he'd bring up weeks later. I fell for it completely. Our early relationship was intoxicating. Damien pursued me with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. He sent flowers to my office, planned elaborate weekend getaways, and talked about our future together like it was written in the stars. He made me feel like I was part of something bigger than myself, like together we could build an empire. The red flags were there from the beginning, but they were wrapped in such beautiful packaging that I mistook them for features instead of bugs. Damien expected to be the center of attention in any room he entered. He had strong opinions about how things should be done, and wasn't shy about expressing them. He could be charming and generous when things were going his way, but he had a tendency to become cold and distant when challenged or criticized. Most telling of all, Damien had a very clear vision of what our life together would look like, and in that vision, I played a very specific role. I would be the supportive wife who managed the household and raised the children while he climbed the corporate ladder. I would be the gracious hostess who entertained his colleagues and clients. I would be the beautiful accessory who made him look successful and stable and accomplished. The problem was, he never actually asked me if that was the role I wanted to play. When we got engaged after 2 years of dating, I was so caught up in the romance of it all that I didn't pay attention to how one-sided our planning had become. Damien made decisions about our wedding, our honeymoon, and our future home, with the assumption that I would go along with whatever he decided. When I tried to voice my own preferences or concerns, he had a way of making me feel like I was being difficult or unreasonable. "Trust me, Rebecca," he would say with that confident smile that had hooked me from the beginning. "I know what's best for us." And like a fool, I believed him. By the time we married and moved into our starter home in Cedar Grove, the stepping stone neighborhood before Millbrook Heights, I had already begun the process of shrinking myself to fit into the space Damien had created for me. I convinced myself it was compromise, that all marriages required sacrifice, that love meant supporting your partner's dreams, even if it meant putting your own on hold. When Damien suggested I take a break from my career after Chloe was born, it seemed logical. Childcare was expensive, his salary was growing, and someone needed to be home with the baby. When he suggested we have another child quickly so they could be close in age, it made sense. When he encouraged me to focus on being a full-time mother instead of trying to balance work and family, it felt like he was being considerate of how overwhelmed I was feeling. What I didn't understand was that each of these decisions was strategically removing my independence, my financial security, and my sense of self-worth. Damien wasn't being supportive. He was being possessive. He wasn't thinking about what was best for our family. He was thinking about what was best for him. By the time Tyler was born 2 years later, I had been out of the workforce for almost 3 years. My MBA felt like ancient history. My professional contacts had moved on, and my entire identity had become wrapped up in being Damien's wife and the children's mother. I told myself I was happy, that this was what I had always wanted, that being a mother was the most important job in the world. But deep down, I knew I was disappearing. Damien, meanwhile, was thriving. His career was advancing exactly as he had predicted, his salary was increasing every year, and he was building the reputation and the lifestyle he had always envisioned for himself. He bought his BMW, then upgraded to a Mercedes. We moved from Cedar Grove to our dream house in Millbrook Heights. He joined the country club, started playing golf with clients, and began talking about investment properties. And I was the perfect accessory to his success story. The devoted wife who kept his home running smoothly, who raised his children beautifully, who smiled graciously at company parties and never complained about the long hours he worked, or the business trips that seemed to get longer and more frequent every year. What I didn't know was that those business trips weren't always about business, and that perfect life we had built together was already starting to crack from the inside. Despite everything I just told you about those early warning signs, I genuinely believed we were building something beautiful together. For nearly 8 years after we moved to Millbrook Heights, I convinced myself that I was living the dream life that so many women would envy. I had a gorgeous home with marble countertops and a 3-car garage, 2 healthy children who were excelling in school, and a husband who was climbing the corporate ladder exactly as he had promised he would. Our house on Maple Ridge Drive was everything we had talked about during those late-night conversations when we were first dating. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with an island that seated 6, and a backyard that was perfect for hosting barbecues and birthday parties. Damien had insisted on the mortgage being entirely in his name since he was the primary breadwinner, which seemed logical at the time. I was so proud when we finally got the keys and I could start decorating our forever home. I threw myself into creating the perfect family life with the same intensity I had once brought to my career. I researched the best schools in the district and made sure Chloe and Tyler were enrolled in every activity that would give them advantages. Piano lessons, soccer teams, swimming classes, art camps. I was the mother who never missed a recital or a game, who volunteered for every school fundraiser, who organized playdates and birthday parties that other parents talked about for months afterward. Damien seemed genuinely happy during those years. He would come home from work and find dinner waiting, the children's homework completed, and the house spotless. He would kiss me on the cheek and tell me how grateful he was to have a wife who made his life so easy. He'd sit at the dinner table and listen to Chloe tell him about her day at school, or watch Tyler demonstrate the new soccer moves he'd learned at practice, and I would look at our little family and feel overwhelmed with satisfaction. We had date nights every Friday, dinner at Romano's Italian Bistro or the steakhouse downtown, sometimes followed by a movie or a walk through Heritage Park. Damien would hold my hand across the dinner table and tell me how lucky he felt to be married to someone who understood what really mattered in life. He would talk about his plans for the future, how he was going to make partner at Nexus Financial within the next 5 years, how we would eventually upgrade to an even bigger house in the exclusive Thornfield Estates neighborhood. I loved those conversations because he always included me in his visions. When we move to Thornfield, he would say, or, once I make partner, we'll be able to take the kids to Europe every summer. It felt like we were partners working toward the same goals, like every sacrifice I was making was building towards something greater for our entire family. The truth is, I was good at being a wife and mother. I was organized, detail-oriented, and genuinely enjoyed creating a warm, welcoming home environment. I planned elaborate Christmas mornings and Easter egg hunts. I threw surprise birthday parties for Damien that included all his colleagues and their wives. I researched family vacation destinations and planned every detail of our trips to Disney World, the Grand Canyon, and that magical summer we spent 2 weeks at a lake house in the mountains. Damien's career was flourishing exactly as he had predicted. He was promoted to senior account manager, then to team lead, then to regional director. His salary increased every year, and with it came bonuses that allowed us to upgrade our cars, renovate the kitchen, and start talking seriously about investment properties. He joined the Riverside Springs Country Club and started playing golf 3 times a week with clients and colleagues. He bought expensive watches and tailored suits that made him look like the successful executive he was becoming. I was so proud of him. When we attended company parties and charity galas, I would watch him work the room with that natural charm that had attracted me in the first place, and I would feel genuinely happy that I had chosen such an ambitious, successful partner. Other wives would comment on how confident and charismatic he was, how lucky I was to be married to someone with such obvious potential for greatness. What made those years feel so perfect was that Damien seemed to genuinely appreciate everything I contributed to our life together. He would brag to his colleagues about my cooking, about how well-behaved and accomplished our children were, about how I managed to keep our household running so smoothly that he never had to worry about anything domestic. He would tell people that his success would be impossible without a wife who understood that his career had to come first, who never complained about long hours or business travel, who made home a place he actually wanted to come back to. During family gatherings at his parents' house in Oak Valley, Damien would put his arm around me and tell his family how grateful he was that I had given up my career to focus on what really mattered. His mother would nod approvingly and make comments about how rare it was to find a woman who understood that a man needed support to reach his full potential. His father would clap him on the back and say he had chosen well, that behind every successful man was a woman willing to sacrifice for the greater good. I ate up every word of that praise. After years of feeling like I had lost my professional identity, it felt wonderful to be recognized and valued for the choice I had made. I convinced myself that what I was doing was not just important but noble, that supporting my husband's dreams while raising our children was the highest calling a woman could have. The children seemed happy and secure during those years. Chloe was excelling in school and had developed a real talent for playing piano. Tyler was athletic and popular, with a natural leadership ability that made him team captain in every sport he played. They never seemed to lack for anything. Nice clothes, the latest technology, trips to theme parks and beach resorts. They had friends whose parents also had successful careers and beautiful homes, and they fit seamlessly into the social circles that came with living in Millbrook Heights. Even our extended social life felt perfect during those years. We had a core group of couples, other families from the neighborhood and Damien's work, who got together regularly for dinner parties and weekend barbecues. I became known as the hostess who could throw together an elegant dinner party for 12 people with just a few days' notice. I could coordinate potluck dinners for the school fundraiser and organize group vacations that kept everyone happy and entertained. Looking back now, I can see that I was performing happiness rather than actually living it, but at the time, the performance felt genuine. I had convinced myself that this was what success looked like, that the slight feeling of emptiness I sometimes experienced was just the normal adjustment that came with major life changes. I told myself that fulfillment would come from watching my children grow up confident and accomplished, from supporting my husband as he achieved his professional goals, from creating a home that everyone wanted to visit. I believed we were building something that would last forever. I thought the foundation we had created was strong enough to weather any storm. I never imagined that while I was busy perfecting our life together, Damien was already planning how to tear it all down. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared about 2 years before everything completely fell apart, though I didn't recognize it as a crack at the time. It started with Damien's phone habits. For years, he had been the kind of person who left his phone lying around the house, who would ask me to check his messages when he was driving, who never seemed to have anything to hide. Suddenly, his phone was always face down on the nightstand, always in his pocket, always requiring a password that he claimed he had to change for, quote, work security reasons. When I asked him about it casually one evening, he got defensive in a way that seemed disproportionate to such an innocent question. "Why do you need to know my password, Rebecca? Don't you trust me?" he asked with this edge in his voice that I had rarely heard before. I quickly backtracked, assuring him that of course I trusted him, that I was just curious about the sudden change. He relaxed immediately and explained that Nexus Financial had implemented new security protocols for all senior staff, requiring them to use complex passwords and change them regularly. It made perfect sense. Damien was handling increasingly sensitive client information as he moved up in the company, and financial firms were notorious for their strict security measures. I felt foolish for even questioning it, and made a mental note to be more supportive of the pressures he was facing at work. But then came the late nights at the office that seemed to multiply every week. Damien had always worked long hours. That was nothing new, but these weren't just long days anymore. These were 10, 11, sometimes 12-hour days followed by work dinners that lasted until midnight. He would come home exhausted, claiming that a major client was demanding around-the-clock attention, or that a crucial deal was requiring all hands on deck for weeks at a time. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I would keep his dinner warm in the oven, help the kids with their homework alone, and handle bedtime routines by myself night after night. When Chloe had her piano recital at Eastbridge Elementary, and Damien missed it because of a client emergency, I took pictures and videos to show him later. When Tyler's soccer team made it to the regional championships and Damien couldn't attend because he was traveling for work, I cheered loud enough for both parents and promised Tyler that Daddy would make it to the next big game. The travel was another red flag that I rationalized away completely. Damien had always traveled for work occasionally, but suddenly he was gone every other week. Chicago for client meetings, Atlanta for training seminars, Denver for conference presentations. The destinations seemed to change constantly, and the duration of these trips kept getting longer. What used to be overnight trips became 3-day excursions, then week-long absences that left me essentially functioning as a single parent. When I mentioned to our neighbor Catherine Henley that Damien seemed to be traveling more than ever, she made an offhand comment that stuck with me. "That's strange. My husband works in finance too, and he says the industry has been moving toward virtual meetings for everything these days. Saves money on travel expenses." I brushed off her comment at the time, telling myself that Damien's clients were probably more traditional, more hands-on, more demanding of personal attention. But the seed of doubt was planted. The financial changes were subtle at first, so subtle that I almost didn't notice them. Our joint checking account, which I used for household expenses and family needs, seemed to have less money in it than usual. When I mentioned it to Damien, he explained that he had moved some of our money into new investment accounts that would earn better returns. He showed me papers from Meridian Investment Group, a company I had never heard of, but the documents looked official and professional. He assured me that this was a temporary adjustment while he worked with a financial advisor to optimize our portfolio for better long-term growth. "You don't need to worry about the details, Rebecca," he said in that patronizing tone that always made me feel like I was bothering him with trivial concerns. "I'm handling all of this, just trust me to take care of our financial future." And I did trust him. He was the one with the finance background, the one who understood investments and market trends and tax implications. I had been out of the professional world for so long that I felt completely unqualified to question his decisions about money management. When the household account seemed tight, I simply adjusted my spending, bought generic brands at the grocery store, and postponed the kitchen renovation we had been planning. Around the same time, Damien started working out obsessively. He joined an expensive gym called Elite Fitness Center in downtown Riverside Springs, claiming that his doctor had recommended more exercise to manage work stress. Suddenly, he was leaving the house at 5:30 in the morning for workout sessions before work, and he started scheduling evening gym sessions 3 times a week. He bought new workout clothes, expensive athletic shoes, and a premium gym membership that included personal training sessions. The physical changes were noticeable within just a few months. Damien lost weight, gained muscle definition, and started paying more attention to his appearance than he had in years. He bought new cologne, something called Midnight Essence, that smelled completely different from the familiar scent he had worn throughout our marriage. He updated his entire wardrobe, claiming that his weight loss required new clothes, and he started getting his hair cut at an upscale salon called Prestige Cuts, instead of the regular barbershop he had visited for years. When I complimented him on how good he looked, he seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "It's just about feeling healthy," he would say, deflecting my attempts to be supportive of his new fitness routine. He never invited me to join him at the gym, never suggested that we could work out together, never seemed interested in sharing this new aspect of his life with me. The changes in our physical relationship were perhaps the most painful red flag of all, though I spent months making excuses for what was happening. Damien had always been affectionate, always interested in intimacy, always made me feel desired and attractive despite the changes that pregnancy and motherhood had brought to my body. Suddenly, he seemed distant, distracted, almost reluctant to be close to me. He would come to bed later than usual, claiming he needed to finish work emails or review documents for the next day's meetings. He would wake up earlier than necessary, leaving for the gym before I was fully awake. When we did have moments of potential intimacy, he seemed to be going through the motions, rather than being genuinely present with me. When I tried to talk to him about the distance I was feeling between us, he became defensive and turned the conversation back on me. "You seem stressed lately, Rebecca. Maybe you should think about getting some help for your anxiety. I'm working harder than ever to provide for this family, and instead of being supportive, you're creating problems where none exist." His response made me question my own perceptions. Was I being paranoid? Was I creating issues because I was feeling insecure about the changes in our routine? I started wondering if the problem was with me, if I was being too needy, too demanding, too focused on small details instead of appreciating the bigger picture of our life together. I began seeing a therapist named Dr. Amanda Chen at the Riverside Springs Wellness Center, convinced that I needed to work on my own issues rather than continuing to question Damien's behavior. I spent sessions talking about my insecurities, my fears about aging, my concerns about losing my identity outside of being a wife and mother. Dr. Chen encouraged me to focus on self-care, to find new hobbies and interests, to build a stronger sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on external validation. Looking back now, I realize that Damien had successfully convinced me that all of these red flags were actually problems with my perception rather than problems with his behavior. Every concern I raised was met with a reasonable explanation. Every question was turned into evidence of my own insecurity or paranoia. I was so well trained to trust him, so conditioned to defer to his judgment, so afraid of being the nagging wife who couldn't appreciate her husband's hard work, that I talked myself out of believing my own instincts time and time again. But my instincts were right. Every single one of those red flags was exactly what I thought it was, and I was about to discover just how carefully Damien had been planning to destroy everything we had built together. Despite my attempts to rationalize away every concerning change in Damien's behavior, the red flags kept multiplying in ways that became impossible to ignore. About 6 months after I started noticing the phone secrecy and increased travel, new patterns emerged that made my stomach twist with a dread I couldn't quite name. The credit card statements started arriving with charges I didn't recognize. Expensive dinners at restaurants I had never heard of. Places like Le Bernardin Noir and the Crystal Room. Upscale establishments that charged more for a single meal than I typically spent on groceries for our entire family in a week. When I asked Damien about these charges, he had explanations that sounded plausible on the surface, but felt hollow somehow. "Client dinners are getting more elaborate," he would say, barely glancing up from his laptop. "Nexus is pushing us to wine and dine the big accounts at premium locations. It's all about showing them that we're operating at their level of sophistication." He would show me expense reports that supposedly documented these business meals, but something about the paperwork always felt slightly off. Too neat? Too perfect. Like someone had taken extra care to make sure every detail aligned with his story. Then there were the charges from Tiffany & Company, from Victoria's Secret, from boutiques I had never set foot in. Each purchase had an explanation that made sense individually, but created a disturbing pattern when viewed together. The Tiffany purchase was supposedly a congratulations gift for a colleague who had landed a major client. The Victoria's Secret charge was allegedly for a birthday present for his sister Jennifer, who lived in Portland and rarely spoke to our family. The boutique purchases were supposedly gifts for various female colleagues who had helped him with important presentations. "Since when do you buy gifts for your coworkers?" I asked during one of our increasingly tense conversations about money. "And why are you shopping at stores that sell women's clothing and jewelry?" Damien's response was swift and calculated. "Since I started competing for a promotion that could change our entire family's future, Rebecca. Do you have any idea how political my workplace has become? Building relationships isn't just about doing good work anymore. It's about showing appreciation for the people who can make or break your career. I'm sorry if you can't see the bigger picture here." He had a gift for making me feel small and short-sighted whenever I questioned his decisions. He would frame my concerns as evidence that I didn't understand the complexities of his professional world, that I was too focused on petty details to appreciate the strategic thinking required for his level of success. Each time I raised a question, I walked away feeling like I had been unreasonable and unsupportive. But the most disturbing change was in how Damien interacted with our children. For years, he had been a present and engaged father despite his demanding work schedule. He would help Tyler practice soccer drills in the backyard, attend Chloe's piano recitals, and make time for family movie nights on weekends. Suddenly, he seemed irritated by their normal childhood needs and demands. When Tyler asked for help with a science project about solar systems, Damien snapped that he was too busy with work to deal with school assignments. When Chloe wanted to show him a new piano piece she had learned, he brushed her off with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," without even looking up from his phone. During family dinners, he would answer work calls at the table, holding up his hand to silence anyone who tried to speak while he conducted business conversations that seemed to stretch on forever. The children started directing their questions and requests to me exclusively, as if they had learned that approaching their father was more likely to result in rejection than help. I found myself making excuses for his behavior, telling them that Daddy was under a lot of pressure at work and needed our patience and understanding. "When will Daddy not be stressed anymore?" Chloe asked me one evening after Damien had dismissed her excitement about making the honor roll at school. "It feels like he doesn't want to talk to us anymore." That question broke my heart because I didn't have an answer. The man who used to brag about his children to anyone who would listen now seemed to view them as inconveniences that interfered with his increasingly mysterious schedule. Around this time, I started noticing that Damien was receiving text messages at all hours of the day and night. His phone would buzz during dinner, during family time, even during the middle of the night. Each time, he would check the message immediately, regardless of what was happening around him. When I commented that work seemed to be demanding his attention even during family time, he explained that international clients meant dealing with different time zones and urgent requests that couldn't wait for business hours. "This is what success looks like, Rebecca," he said with that condescending tone that had become his default response to my concerns. "If you want me to keep providing the lifestyle you've become accustomed to, you need to accept that my work doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. But I started paying closer attention to his reactions when these messages arrived. There was something different about the way his face would change when he looked at his phone. A subtle shift in his expression that didn't look like work stress or professional urgency. It looked like anticipation, like excitement, like someone receiving messages they actually wanted to get. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Our neighbor's teenage daughter, Megan Hartwell, worked part-time at Elite Fitness Center as a front desk attendant. During a casual conversation over the fence one Saturday morning, she mentioned seeing Damien at the gym with his girlfriend multiple times over the past few months. "They seem really happy together," Megan said innocently, not realizing the bomb she had just dropped into my world. "She's really pretty, young, blonde, always wearing those expensive workout clothes. They usually work out together and then grab smoothies afterward. I think it's sweet how couples can stay so active together." My blood turned to ice water. "I think you might be confused, Megan. Damien doesn't have a workout partner. He goes to the gym alone." Megan looked genuinely puzzled. "Oh, maybe it's not his girlfriend then, but they definitely seem close. They hold hands sometimes, and last week I saw them kissing in the parking lot." "I just assumed." She trailed off as she registered the expression on my face. "Oh my God, Mrs. Rothwell, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew." I managed to keep my composure until I got back inside the house, but my hands were shaking as I closed the front door. Every suspicious charge on our credit card suddenly made perfect sense. Every late night at the office took on a new meaning. Every business trip became a potential romantic getaway with someone who wasn't his wife. The woman Megan had described sounded exactly like the type of person Damien would be attracted to. Young, blonde, fit, probably uncomplicated in ways that I hadn't been in years. She probably didn't ask him to take out the garbage or remind him about parent-teacher conferences. She probably didn't have stretch marks or worry lines or the exhaustion that comes from managing a household and raising teenagers. I spent the rest of that weekend in a fog of disbelief and rage, watching Damien interact with our family while knowing that he was living a completely different life when he wasn't home. He seemed so normal, so unchanged, so comfortable in his deception that I began to wonder how long this had been going on. How many business trips had actually been romantic vacations? How many client dinners had been dates with his girlfriend? The worst part was that I still had no concrete proof. Everything I had discovered could potentially be explained away, rationalized or dismissed as circumstantial evidence from a suspicious wife who was looking for problems that didn't exist. Damien was too smart to leave obvious evidence lying around, too careful to make mistakes that would definitively expose his double life. But I knew. Deep in my gut, with a certainty that felt like swallowing broken glass, I knew that my marriage was already over and had been over for months. I just didn't know yet how much worse things were about to get, or how carefully Damien had been planning not just to leave me, but to destroy me completely in the process. The moment that shattered my carefully constructed denial came on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, exactly 18 months before our divorce was finalized. I had taken Chloe to her orthodontist appointment at Riverside Dental Associates, and we finished earlier than expected. Instead of killing time at the mall as I had originally planned, I decided to surprise Damien by bringing him his favorite lunch from Rossetti's Deli, the Italian sub with extra provolone that he always ordered when we ate there together as a family. I pulled into the visitor parking lot at Nexus Financial Group at exactly 1:15 p.m., carrying the carefully wrapped sandwich and a thermos of the coffee I had made fresh that morning. I was actually excited about this spontaneous gesture, thinking it might help bridge some of the distance that had been growing between us. Maybe if I showed up more often at his workplace, maybe if I made more effort to be part of his professional world, we could reconnect the way we used to. The receptionist at the front desk, a woman named Linda Rodriguez who had always been friendly during company events, looked genuinely confused when I asked her to call up to Damien's office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rothwell, but Mr. Rothwell isn't in the office today," she said, checking her computer screen with a puzzled expression. According to his calendar, he's been in meetings at the Grandview Corporate Center all week for the Henderson Industries acquisition project. He's not scheduled to be back in the office until next Monday. My stomach dropped like I had fallen off a cliff. "That's strange," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady, despite the roaring in my ears. "He told me he was working late at the office tonight. Maybe there was a schedule change?" Linda pulled up what appeared to be a more detailed calendar and shook her head. "No, there's definitely no mistake. The entire Henderson team has been off-site since last Friday. Mr. Rothwell specifically requested that all his calls be forwarded to his mobile phone because he wouldn't be available for in-person meetings this week." I thanked Linda and walked back to my car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble getting the key into the ignition. If Damien wasn't at work, and he had left the house that morning at 7:30 a.m. carrying his laptop bag and telling me he would be late because of crucial meetings, where exactly had he been going every day for the past week? The Grandview Corporate Center was about 40 minutes across town, so I told myself that maybe he was actually there, maybe Linda had been mistaken about his schedule. I called Damien's cell phone as I drove, and it went straight to voicemail, the generic recording that meant he had deliberately turned off his phone. I tried calling 3 more times during the drive, each call going immediately to voicemail, each unanswered ring feeling like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I arrived at Grandview Corporate Center, I spent 20 minutes walking through the parking garage and outdoor lots, looking for Damien's silver Mercedes. It wasn't there. I went inside and asked the security guard at the front desk if there were any meetings for Nexus Financial Group scheduled in the building. He checked his computer and confirmed that there had been no Nexus personnel in the building for over 2 weeks. Sitting in my car in that parking garage, staring at the concrete walls and trying to process what I had just learned, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about suspicious credit card charges or mysterious text messages anymore. This was about the fact that my husband had been lying to me about his basic whereabouts for at least a week, possibly much longer. I drove home and did something I had never done before in our entire marriage. I searched through Damien's personal belongings. I started with his home office, going through desk drawers and file cabinets, with the methodical thoroughness of someone who finally understood that everything she thought she knew about her life was potentially a lie. Hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, behind folders labeled tax documents and insurance policies, I found a manila envelope that contained papers I had never seen before. Bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Credit card statements for cards that had never been delivered to our house. And, most damning of all, printed emails between Damien and someone named, quote, a.sinclair@marketingfirst.com that made it clear they had been involved in an intimate relationship for over a year. The emails were explicitly sexual, filled with details about hotel rooms and weekend getaways, and plans for a future that didn't include me or our children. There were discussions about apartments they had looked at together, vacation destinations they wanted to visit, and even conversations about how Damien was planning to, quote, handle the Rebecca situation when the time was right. In one email dated just 3 weeks earlier, Amber had written, "I can't wait until you don't have to pretend anymore. I know this is hard, but once you get through the divorce proceedings, we can finally start our real life together. Just remember what your lawyer said about documenting everything that makes her look unstable." Damien's response was even more chilling. "Don't worry, baby. Patricia has everything under control. By the time we're done, Rebecca won't know what hit her. She's been so focused on playing house that she has no idea how much evidence we've been building against her. The gambling addiction story is going to be particularly effective, especially with the financial records we've created." I had to read that email 3 times before my brain could process what I was seeing. They weren't just having an affair, they were actively planning to destroy me in divorce proceedings, using fabricated evidence of problems that didn't exist. They had been building a case against me, creating false financial records, and planning to paint me as an unstable, addicted, unfit mother. Further down in the email chain, I found discussions about how they had been moving money out of our joint accounts into hidden accounts that would be untraceable during divorce proceedings. Damien had been systematically stealing our savings while creating fake documentation that would make it appear as though I had been the one spending money recklessly on gambling and frivolous purchases. There were emails about how they had been gathering statements from mutual friends who could be convinced to testify about my erratic behavior and drinking problem. Accusations that were completely fabricated but apparently supported by carefully orchestrated incidents where Damien had encouraged me to have wine at social gatherings, and then pointed out my excessive consumption to others. The most devastating discovery was a series of emails discussing how they planned to use my sessions with Dr. Amanda Chen against me. Somehow, Damien had gotten access to information about my therapy appointments, and was planning to argue that my need for counseling was evidence of mental instability that made me unfit to have primary custody of our children. As I sat there in Damien's office, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate and cruel betrayal I could have imagined, I realized that every fight we had been having, every time he had made me feel crazy for questioning his behavior, every instance where he had convinced me that I was being paranoid or unreasonable, had been part of a calculated plan to destroy my credibility and my confidence in preparation for the legal battle he was planning to wage against me. I took pictures of every single document with my phone, copying email addresses and account numbers, and any other information that might be important later. Then I carefully put everything back exactly where I had found it, making sure that Damien would have no idea that I had discovered his secret planning. By the time I heard his car in the driveway at 8:30 p.m., I was sitting in our living room, calmly reading a book and waiting for him to come home from whatever he had actually been doing all day. When he walked through the door, I looked up and smiled. "How was your day, honey?" I asked, my voice perfectly normal, despite the fact that my entire world had just collapsed around me. "Exhausting," he said, loosening his tie with the same gesture I had watched him make thousands of times before. "The Henderson project is more complicated than we anticipated. I'll probably have to work late again tomorrow." "That's too bad," I replied, turning a page in my book as if I didn't know that every word coming out of his mouth was a carefully constructed lie. "I hope it gets resolved soon." As I watched him walk upstairs to shower off whatever he had actually been doing that day, I knew that my marriage was over. But more than that, I knew that I was about to enter the fight of my life against a man who had been planning my destruction for over a year, while I had been blissfully unaware that we were at war. I spent 3 days after my discovery living in the most surreal state of my life, pretending to be the oblivious wife while secretly copying every piece of evidence I could find, and consulting with my own attorney. I had contacted Rachel Morrison from Morrison & Associates, ironically, the same firm where I had worked before marriage, and she had immediately referred me to the best divorce lawyer in Riverside Springs, a woman named Diana Blackstone, who specialized in complex asset protection cases. Diana's initial consultation was brutal, but necessary. She reviewed the evidence I had gathered and confirmed my worst fears. Damien and his attorney had been building an extremely sophisticated case designed to leave me with virtually nothing. The fabricated gambling records alone would have been devastating in court, but combined with the hidden assets and character assassination strategy, I would have been completely destroyed if I had walked into divorce proceedings unprepared. "Your husband is not just cheating on you," Diana said with the kind of calm professionalism that made her words even more chilling. "He's orchestrating one of the most elaborate financial and emotional destructions I've seen in 20 years of practice. If you had waited much longer to discover this, or if you had confronted him without evidence, you would have lost everything: your children, your home, your financial security, and your reputation." Armed with Diana's advice and copies of all the evidence safely stored in her office, I decided it was time to confront Damien. But I wasn't going to do it the way he expected. I wasn't going to be the emotional, hysterical wife having a breakdown. I was going to be the strategic, intelligent woman who had once earned an MBA and built a successful career before I had made the mistake of trusting him with my future. I chose Friday evening for our confrontation, deliberately picking a time when the children would be spending the night at their friends' houses. Chloe was at a sleepover with her best friend Madison Pierce, and Tyler was camping in the backyard with the Henderson boys next door. I wanted privacy for what was about to happen, and I wanted to make sure that whatever Damien's reaction was, our children wouldn't witness it. I prepared meticulously for this conversation. I had printed copies of the most damning emails, bank statements showing the hidden accounts, and credit card records documenting his spending on Amber. I had also set up a small recording device that Diana had advised me to use, since documenting Damien's responses might be crucial for future legal proceedings. When Damien came home that evening at 7:15 p.m., actually on time for once, probably because Amber had other plans, I was waiting for him in his home office with all the evidence laid out neatly on his desk like a prosecutor presenting a case. "We need to talk," I said calmly as he appeared in the doorway, still holding his briefcase and looking irritated that I was in his private space. "Rebecca, I've had a long day, and I really don't have time for whatever domestic crisis you think needs my immediate attention," he said with that dismissive tone that had become his default response to me over the past year. "I think you'll want to make time for this," I replied, gesturing toward the papers spread across his desk. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to Amber why you're going to be late for your weekend plans." The change in Damien's expression was instantaneous and telling. The confident, slightly annoyed businessman disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like he had been caught in headlights. He set down his briefcase and walked slowly toward the desk, his eyes scanning the documents I had arranged there. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice had lost all its authority. He knew exactly what it was. "This is evidence of your affair with Amber Sinclair, documentation of the money you've been stealing from our joint accounts, copies of your emails discussing your plans to frame me for gambling addiction, and records of the hidden assets you've been building with your attorney Patricia Vance," I said, my voice steady and professional. "This is proof that you've been planning to destroy me for over a year, while I was completely unaware that my marriage was over." Damien's face went through a series of expressions: shock, panic, calculation, and finally a cold anger that I had never seen from him before. When he spoke, his voice was completely different from the man I had been married to for 12 years. "You went through my private files," he said, not denying any of the evidence, but focusing instead on my supposed violation of his privacy. "You had no right to invade my personal space or read my confidential communications." I almost laughed at the audacity of his response. "I had no right?" "Damien, you've been systematically stealing money from our family, fabricating evidence to use against me in court, and planning to take our children away from me based on lies you created. And you're concerned about your privacy? You don't understand the complexities of what I'm dealing with," he said, shifting tactics to the condescending explanation approach that had worked so well for him in the past. "Yes, I've been seeing Amber, but our marriage has been over for years. You've become someone I don't even recognize anymore. Controlling, paranoid, impossible to live with. I've been trying to find a way to end this relationship that would be fair to everyone involved." "Fair to everyone?" I stood up from his desk chair, my calm facade finally cracking. "You call fabricating evidence of mental illness and gambling addiction fair? You call stealing our savings and hiding assets fair? You call turning our children against me fair?" For the first time since I had known him, Damien looked genuinely rattled. He had clearly never expected me to discover his planning, and he certainly hadn't prepared for this level of detailed confrontation. He tried to regain control of the conversation by attacking my character, just like his emails had outlined. "Rebecca, you're obviously having some kind of breakdown. This paranoid behavior, this obsession with conspiracy theories, this is exactly the kind of instability I've been trying to protect our children from," he said, his voice taking on the concerned, reasonable tone of someone dealing with an unbalanced person. But I was ready for this response because I had read his playbook. "Save the performance, Damien. I know this is the strategy you and Patricia plan to use against me in court. I've read the emails where you discuss how to make me look unstable. I know about the fake financial records you've created. I know about the friends you've been manipulating to testify against my character." The mask finally slipped completely. The charming, successful husband disappeared, and what was left was someone I barely recognized. Cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse for the destruction he had been planning. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You want to know the truth? Yes, I've been planning to divorce you. Yes, I've been with Amber for over a year. And yes, I've been preparing to make sure that when this marriage ends, I get to keep the life I've worked to build, while you get exactly what you deserve for being the boring, needy, suffocating woman you've become." He walked closer to me, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt physically intimidated by him. "You think you're so smart finding these emails and documents? You have no idea what you're up against, Rebecca. I have resources, connections, and legal representation that will crush you in court. Whatever evidence you think you've found, it won't matter when I'm finished destroying your credibility." Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. "And if you think you're going to use any of this information against me, remember that I know every weakness you have, every insecurity, every mistake you've ever made. I know how to make you look like an unfit mother, and I know exactly which buttons to push to make you have a complete breakdown in front of a judge." As I listened to this man, this stranger who had somehow replaced my husband, make threats about destroying me and taking my children, I realized that everything I had discovered was actually worse than I had initially understood. This wasn't just about infidelity or financial betrayal. This was about a sociopathic level of manipulation and cruelty that I had been completely blind to for years. But Damien had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He had underestimated me completely. He had assumed that the woman who had given up her career and devoted herself to his success would be helpless when he decided to discard her. He had no idea that underneath the accommodating wife and devoted mother was someone who had once been smart enough to earn an MBA, strategic enough to build a successful career, and strong enough to rebuild her life from nothing. The war he had been planning in secret was about to become a fair fight, and I intended to win. What happened in the weeks following our confrontation was like watching a perfectly orchestrated demolition of everything I thought I knew about my life. Damien didn't waste a single day after I confronted him with the evidence of his affair and financial betrayal. By Monday morning, he had already set his plan into motion, and I discovered just how thoroughly he had been preparing for this war. The first betrayal came from someone I never saw coming: my own sister. Sarah had always been my closest confidant, the person I called when I needed advice or support, the aunt who adored Chloe and Tyler and visited us at least twice a month. On Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after my confrontation with Damien, she called me with tears in her voice. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say this gently," she said, her voice shaking with what I initially thought was sympathy for what I was going through. "Damien called me yesterday. He's really worried about you. He says you've been acting erratically, that you accused him of terrible things, and that he's concerned about your mental health." I felt my stomach drop, but I tried to stay calm. "Sarah, I found evidence that he's been having an affair and stealing money from our accounts. I have documentation of everything. He's been planning to—" "Rebecca, stop," she interrupted me, and her tone had shifted from concern to something that sounded almost like pity. "Damien showed me some things. Bank records of gambling transactions, receipts from online betting sites, credit card charges for cash advances. He's been trying to protect you, but he says the addiction has gotten out of control." The room started spinning around me. "What gambling transactions? Sarah, I have never gambled a single dollar in my entire life. You know me better than that. Those records are fabricated." "Honey, I know this is hard to hear, but denial is part of addiction," Sarah said with the kind of gentle, patronizing voice people use when they're trying to help someone who can't see reality. "Damien says you've been hiding the extent of the problem, but the financial evidence is overwhelming. He's been covering your losses for months to try to keep the family together." As I listened to my own sister repeat the lies that Damien and his attorney had crafted, I realized that this conversation had been planned and rehearsed. Damien hadn't just been building evidence against me. He had been systematically turning the people closest to me into his allies by convincing them that I was sick, and he was the long-suffering husband trying to save our family. "Sarah, please listen to me," I begged, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "I can prove that those records are fake. I have copies of emails where Damien and his girlfriend discuss creating false evidence. You have to believe me." "Rebecca, you're scaring me," Sarah said, and I could hear genuine fear in her voice. "The things you're saying sound like paranoid delusions. Claiming that bank records are fake, that there's some conspiracy against you. This is exactly what Damien said you would do when confronted with the truth about your gambling problem." By the end of that phone call, I realized that Sarah truly believed Damien's version of events. Whatever evidence he had shown her had been convincing enough to override 12 years of knowing me as her sister. She hung up after promising to be there for me when I was ready to get help. But it was clear that her help would involve supporting Damien's narrative that I was mentally unstable and needed treatment. The betrayals continued throughout that week, like dominoes falling in perfect succession. Our longtime friends, Marcus and Jennifer Caldwell, who had been part of our social circle since the children were toddlers, called to express their concern about my, quote, recent behavior. Apparently, Damien had confided in Marcus about my supposed gambling addiction and erratic mood swings, providing specific examples of incidents that had been carefully recontextualized to support his story. "Jennifer and I have been worried about you for months," Marcus said during a conversation that felt like an intervention disguised as a friendly check-in. "At the Thompsons' anniversary party last month, you seemed really agitated and defensive when people were trying to have normal conversations with you. And at the school fundraiser, several people mentioned that you seemed to be drinking more than usual." I remembered both of those events clearly. At the Thompson party, I had been upset because Damien had been texting constantly with what I now knew were messages from Amber, and I had asked him to put his phone away during our friend's celebration. At the school fundraiser, I had consumed exactly 2 glasses of wine over the course of 4 hours, but Damien had made several comments about my drinking that had embarrassed me in front of other parents. Now I understood that those moments hadn't been spontaneous reactions to my behavior. They had been calculated opportunities for Damien to plant seeds of doubt about my stability in the minds of our mutual friends. Every social gathering over the past year had apparently been a stage for him to perform the role of the concerned husband dealing with a troubled wife. The most devastating betrayal came from Damien's manipulation of our children. I had been carefully avoiding involving Chloe and Tyler in any of the adult drama surrounding their father's affair, but Damien had no such scruples. He began having private conversations with them about Mommy's problems and how much stress it was causing the family. When I picked up Tyler from soccer practice on Thursday evening, his coach, David Brennan, pulled me aside with obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Rothwell, Tyler mentioned that things have been difficult at home lately. He seems really worried about you. Is there anything the team parents can do to help?" My 16-year-old son had been discussing our family problems with his soccer coach because his father had convinced him that I was having a breakdown that required adult intervention. When I tried to talk to Tyler about it that evening, he looked at me with a mixture of fear and pity that broke my heart. "Dad explained about your gambling problem, Mom," Tyler said, his young voice trying to sound mature and understanding. "He says that's why you've been acting so paranoid and angry lately. He says you're sick, but that sick people can get better with help." Hearing my own child repeat Damien's lies about me was more painful than discovering the affair had been. My son genuinely believed that his mother was mentally ill and addicted to gambling because his father had systematically poisoned him against me while positioning himself as the stable, protective parent. Chloe's reaction was even worse. She had always been Daddy's little girl, and Damien had leveraged that relationship to turn her into his advocate. When I tried to explain that her father had been lying about me, she became angry and defensive. "Why are you trying to make Dad look like the bad guy?" she demanded, with all the righteousness of a 16-year-old who believed she understood the complexities of adult relationships. "He's been working so hard to take care of our family while you've been having problems. Now you're trying to blame him for everything instead of getting help." The most chilling part of Damien's manipulation of our children was how he had coached them to document my, quote, concerning behavior. Tyler had been keeping notes about times when I seemed upset or angry at Damien's request, supposedly to help doctors understand my condition. Chloe had been encouraged to pay attention to my spending and report any unusual purchases that might indicate gambling activity. My own children had been turned into spies gathering evidence against me, all while believing they were helping their sick mother by supporting their responsible father. Within 2 weeks of our confrontation, Damien had successfully isolated me from my support system and convinced everyone who mattered that I was the problem in our marriage. My sister thought I was delusional. Our friends thought I was having a breakdown. My children thought I was addicted to gambling and mentally unstable. Even my parents, who lived 3 states away, called to express their concern after receiving a worried phone call from their son-in-law about my deteriorating mental health. The legal papers arrived on a Friday afternoon while I was picking up groceries at Westfield Market. A process server approached me in the parking lot and handed me a thick envelope containing divorce papers that painted me as an unfit mother with a gambling addiction, a history of erratic behavior, and a pattern of financial irresponsibility that had endangered our family's security. Attached to the divorce petition were affidavits from Sarah, the Caldwells, and several other friends and neighbors, all swearing under oath that they had witnessed my unstable behavior and expressing concern about my ability to care for our children. There were bank records showing the fabricated gambling transactions, documentation of my supposed excessive drinking, and even statements from the children's teachers about their concerns regarding the stress Tyler and Chloe were experiencing at home due to their mother's problems. Reading through those legal documents while standing in a grocery store parking lot, I realized that Damien hadn't just been planning to divorce me. He had been engineering the complete destruction of my reputation, my relationships, and my credibility. Every person I had trusted, every relationship I had valued, every support system I had relied on, had been systematically turned against me by a man who had spent over a year convincing everyone that he was the victim and I was the villain. But as I sat in my car, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal cascade, I remembered something Diana Blackstone had told me during our consultation. The most dangerous thing about narcissistic manipulation is how effective it can be in the short term. But eventually, the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when the manipulator gets overconfident and makes mistakes. Damien thought he had won the war before I even knew we were fighting. What he didn't realize was that I had been gathering my own evidence, building my own case, and preparing for a battle that he had no idea was coming. The 6 months that followed the cascade of betrayals were the darkest period of my life. I was forced to move out of our family home on Maple Ridge Drive and into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Clearwater Commons, the least expensive complex I could find that would still allow me to stay within the same school district as my children. The apartment was everything our beautiful house wasn't. Thin walls, outdated appliances, and a view of the parking lot instead of our carefully landscaped backyard. The financial devastation was immediate and crushing. Because Damien had successfully hidden our assets and convinced the court that I was a financial liability due to my supposed gambling addiction, I was granted only minimal temporary spousal support, barely enough to cover rent and basic living expenses. Meanwhile, he remained in our 4-bedroom house, driving his Mercedes, and maintaining the lifestyle we had built together while I struggled to afford groceries. The legal bills were destroying what little financial stability I had left. Diana Blackstone was excellent, but excellent attorneys cost money I didn't have. Every motion Damien's lawyer filed, every deposition they scheduled, every expert witness they hired to testify about my supposed mental instability added thousands of dollars to my mounting debt. I had to take out a loan against my mother's life insurance policy just to keep Diana on retainer. What made the financial stress even worse was the knowledge that I was paying to defend myself against lies that Damien had the resources to sustain indefinitely. Patricia Vance seemed to have an unlimited budget for expert witnesses, private investigators, and psychological evaluations designed to support their narrative that I was an unfit mother. Meanwhile, I was cutting coupons and buying generic brands to make ends meet. The custody arrangement was a nightmare that reminded me daily of how completely I had lost control of my life. I was granted supervised visitation with Tyler and Chloe every other weekend and 1 evening per week, as if I were a danger to the children I had devoted 15 years of my life to raising. The court-appointed supervisor was a woman named Helen Kraft, a stern social worker who treated me like a criminal and documented every interaction I had with my own children. During those supervised visits, I had to watch my relationship with Tyler and Chloe deteriorate in real time. They were polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the artificial setting, and confused about why their mother needed to be monitored like a potentially dangerous person. Tyler would answer my questions with one-word responses, and spend most of our time together playing games on his phone. Chloe would sit stiffly beside me during our conversations, clearly repeating things Damien had coached her to say about how much happier and more peaceful things were at home now. The worst part was seeing how Damien's manipulation had changed their perception of me fundamentally. When I tried to ask about their schoolwork or friends, they would exchange glances as if I were prying inappropriately. When I brought them small gifts or tried to plan activities we used to enjoy together, they seemed suspicious of my motives, as if every gesture might be evidence of the instability their father had convinced them to watch for. During one particularly devastating visit, Tyler asked me directly when I was going to get help for my problems so that we could be a normal family again. The fact that my 14-year-old son genuinely believed that our family's destruction was caused by my gambling addiction and mental illness, rather than his father's affair and systematic betrayal, was more painful than any legal setback or financial loss. The isolation was suffocating. My sister Sarah had stopped returning my calls entirely after I continued to insist that the gambling evidence was fabricated. The Caldwells and our other longtime friends treated me like I was contagious, crossing to the other side of the street when they saw me at the grocery store or school events. Even casual acquaintances from the neighborhood and the country club had apparently heard about my problems and regarded me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I started having panic attacks in public places, triggered by the constant feeling that everyone was watching me and judging me based on the lies Damien had spread. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or attending Tyler's soccer games became ordeals that left me exhausted and emotionally drained. I felt like I was living under a microscope, where every expression on my face or tone in my voice could be misinterpreted as evidence of my supposed instability. The depression that settled over me during those months was unlike anything I had ever experienced. There were days when I barely got out of bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was facing and the seeming impossibility of proving the truth to people who had already decided I was lying. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling of my cheap apartment, wondering how the woman who had once been confident enough to earn an MBA and successful enough to build a career had become someone who was afraid to answer her own phone. Dr. Chen had recommended that I continue therapy during this period, but even those sessions became complicated by the knowledge that anything I said could potentially be used against me in court. I found myself censoring my own thoughts and feelings, afraid that expressing legitimate anger about Damien's betrayal or sadness about losing my children would be twisted into evidence of emotional instability. The professional consequences were devastating as well. I had been out of the workforce for over 12 years, and my attempts to find employment were hampered by both my outdated skills and the cloud of suspicion that surrounded me. Word of my supposed gambling addiction and mental health issues had somehow reached potential employers in our small professional community. Several promising interviews ended abruptly after background checks or informal conversations with people who knew my story from Damien's perspective. I finally found a part-time position at Riverside Community Bank as a loan processor, a job that paid less than half of what I had earned fresh out of college 15 years earlier. My supervisor, Janet Walsh, was kind but clearly had concerns about my reliability based on whatever version of my story she had heard. I was grateful for the work, but sitting in a cubicle processing other people's loan applications while fighting for my own financial survival felt like a daily reminder of how far I had fallen. The nights were the worst. Alone in my apartment, surrounded by the bare minimum furniture I could afford, I would think about Tyler and Chloe sleeping in their familiar bedrooms just 15 minutes away, while believing that their mother was too sick and dangerous to live with them. I would remember family dinners around our kitchen island, vacation photos from happier times, and the life I had thought we were building together, and I would feel overwhelmed by grief for everything I had lost. During my lowest moments, I understood why some people simply disappear, rather than continuing to fight battles that seem impossible to win. The combination of financial stress, social isolation, legal pressure, and the daily heartbreak of watching my children slip away from me was almost more than I could bear. There were nights when I considered just walking away from Riverside Springs, starting over somewhere else where no one knew Damien's version of my story, and trying to rebuild my life without the constant reminder of everything I had lost. But even in my darkest moments, there was something inside me that refused to give up completely. Maybe it was stubborn pride, maybe it was maternal instinct, or maybe it was just the memory of the woman I used to be before Damien convinced me to shrink myself to fit his vision of the perfect wife. Whatever it was, it kept me getting up every morning, showing up for my supervised visits with my children, and working with Diana to build our case piece by piece. I had no idea that Damien's overconfidence and sense of invincibility were about to lead him to make the kinds of mistakes that would give me the ammunition I needed to destroy him as completely as he had destroyed me. I was about to learn that sometimes the best revenge comes not from planning, but from simply surviving long enough to watch your enemies destroy themselves. The phone call that changed everything came on a rainy Thursday morning in March, exactly 14 months after Damien had served me with divorce papers. I was getting ready for work at the bank, rushing through my morning routine in the tiny bathroom of my Clearwater Commons apartment, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Too many creditors and process servers had my number by then, But something made me answer. "Mrs. Rothwell, this is Detective Amanda Torres with the Riverside Springs Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your husband, Damian Rothwell. Are you available to come to the station this morning?" My heart stopped. 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind, none of them good. Had Damian finally succeeded in having me arrested for the fabricated gambling charges? Was this another legal trap designed to make me look unstable or uncooperative? "What is this regarding?" I asked carefully, remembering Diana's advice to never speak to law enforcement without representation. "Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss this in person, but I can tell you that we're investigating financial irregularities at Nexus Financial Group, and your husband's name has come up in our inquiry. You're not in any trouble. We actually think you might be able to help us with information about some transactions we've discovered." 2 hours later, I was sitting in an interview room at the Riverside Springs Police Station with Diana Blackstone beside me, listening to Detective Torres explain how Damian's carefully constructed world was collapsing in ways he had never anticipated. 3 weeks ago, we received a complaint from Nexus Financial Group about suspected embezzlement, Detective Torres began, spreading documents across the table between us. During their internal audit, they discovered that someone had been manipulating client accounts and transferring funds to unauthorized external accounts. The amounts we're talking about exceed $2 million over an 18-month period. I felt Diana's hand squeeze my arm as the detective continued. "The investigation led us to your husband's department, and specifically to accounts he had direct access to. But here's where it gets interesting for your situation, Mrs. Rothwell. When we traced the destination accounts for these stolen funds, we found a complex network of shell companies and hidden accounts, including some of the same accounts that appear in your divorce proceedings as evidence of your supposed gambling activities." The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. In his effort to frame me for financial irresponsibility, Damian had used the same hidden accounts where he was storing money he had stolen from his clients. The fabricated gambling transactions he had created to destroy me in court were commingled with actual evidence of his embezzlement from Nexus Financial. We've also discovered that the timestamps on many of the transactions attributed to you in your divorce case don't match your actual whereabouts during those times, Detective Torres continued. Your husband apparently didn't realize that we can track IP addresses and location data for online transactions. The gambling activity attributed to you was actually conducted from his office computer at Nexus Financial during business hours when you were documented to be elsewhere. Diana leaned forward, her professional excitement barely contained. "Detective, are you saying that the evidence Mr. Rothwell presented in divorce court showing my client's gambling addiction is actually evidence of his own criminal activity?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Detective Torres replied. "It appears that Mr. Rothwell killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He used his embezzlement accounts to create fake evidence of his wife's gambling addiction while hiding the proceeds of his actual crimes. It's one of the most sophisticated financial manipulation schemes we've encountered." But the detective wasn't finished. "We've also been investigating Mr. Rothwell's relationship with Amber Sinclair, who works in the marketing department at Nexus. It appears that Miss Sinclair was aware of and possibly complicit in the embezzlement scheme. She's been receiving regular transfers from the same accounts, and we have evidence that she helped create false documentation to cover the missing funds. The woman who had destroyed my marriage was also a co-conspirator in the crimes that were about to destroy Damian's life. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming." "There's more," Detective Torres said, consulting another file. "During our investigation of Mr. Rothwell's finances, we discovered that he's been engaging in additional fraudulent activities beyond the embezzlement. He's been running what amounts to a sophisticated identity theft operation, using client information from Nexus to open credit accounts and take out loans under false pretenses. The debt he's accumulated using this scheme exceeds $500,000. Diana was taking notes furiously, already understanding the implications for our divorce case. Detective, what's the timeline for charges being filed? Mr. Rothwell will be arrested tomorrow morning, Detective Torres said. We've obtained warrants for multiple felony charges, including embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Miss Sinclair will be arrested simultaneously. We expect both of them to be held without bail, given the flight risk and the magnitude of the charges. As I sat in that interview room, listening to Detective Torres describe the scope of Damien's criminal activities, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: vindication. Every instinct I had questioned, every suspicion I had been gaslighted into dismissing, every moment when I had been made to feel crazy for not trusting him, all of it had been absolutely correct. But the vindication went beyond just being proven right about Damien's character. The detective explained that the investigation had uncovered evidence that would completely destroy the narrative Damien and Patricia Vance had built against me in court. We found communications between your husband and several individuals who provided affidavits against you in the divorce proceedings, Detective Torres continued. It appears that Mr. Rothwell paid at least 3 people to provide false testimony about your behavior and character. We have bank records showing payments to Marcus Caldwell, your sister Sarah, and a woman named Helen Kraft who was supposedly providing objective supervision of your visits with your children. The room started spinning around me. Helen Kraft was being paid by Damien, the court-appointed supervisor? It appears that Ms. Kraft's appointment wasn't as random as it seemed, Detective Torres said grimly. Mr. Rothwell has connections in the family court system through his attorney, and they arranged for someone who would provide the kind of reports they needed to support their case against you. Diana was practically vibrating with excitement. Detective, this means that virtually every piece of evidence presented against my client in the divorce proceedings was fabricated or corrupted through bribery and conspiracy. That's our understanding as well, Detective Torres confirmed. We'll be providing all of this evidence to the district attorney's office and to the family court judge handling your divorce case. I expect there will be significant legal ramifications beyond just the criminal charges. The detective then handed me a folder containing copies of evidence that would change everything. Bank records showing Damien's real financial activities. Communication logs proving he had fabricated the gambling transactions. Records of payments to witnesses who had testified against me. Documentation of the embezzlement scheme that had funded his elaborate deception. Mrs. Rothwell, I want you to know that this investigation has revealed one of the most systematic and cruel manipulations we've ever encountered, Detective Torres said with genuine sympathy. What your husband did to you goes far beyond typical marital fraud. He orchestrated a campaign designed to destroy your reputation, your relationships with your children, and your entire life. The evidence we've uncovered will not only clear your name, but will likely result in significant civil liability for everyone who participated in this conspiracy. As Diana and I left the police station that afternoon, I felt like I was walking out of prison after serving time for crimes I hadn't committed. For the first time in over a year, I could imagine a future where my children would know the truth about their father, where my family and friends would understand how thoroughly they had been manipulated, and where I could rebuild my life without the crushing weight of false accusations. But more than vindication, I felt something else. A cold, calculating satisfaction that the man who had tried to destroy me had actually destroyed himself. Damien's greed, arrogance, and need for control had led him to commit crimes that would send him to prison for years. His attempt to frame me for financial irresponsibility had created a paper trail that exposed his real crimes. His manipulation of witnesses had created a conspiracy that would result in additional charges. Damien Rothwell had been so confident in his ability to control and manipulate everyone around him that he had never considered the possibility that his own actions would be his downfall. Tomorrow morning, while I would be starting to reclaim my life, he would be starting a journey that would cost him his freedom, his reputation, his relationship with our children, and every asset he had worked so hard to steal from me. The war he had started in secret was finally over, and I had won without firing a single shot. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.